let's begin by having you think back to your childhood. Do you recall some of these phrases? Clean your plate. Try one more bite. Eat it, it's good for you. Well, welcome to the world of child feeding. Now, why study child feeding? Well, first, you have to define it. And child feeding is often viewed as holding a spoon in front of a child's face and getting them to eat it. And while, that could be child feeding, it's so much more. And it involves the adult's interaction with the children. It involves the environment that we have around food, what we offer children, the nutrition with food. But that still doesn't answer that question. Why? Well, 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death are nutrition-related. It's about the foods we eat. And we do know that eating habits start in early childhood. And in fact, it's in utero where the fetus in the womb begins to develop preferences. And from birth to age 5, that's where we lay the foundation for food consumption. So, that then goes to child feeding. And often what I have is adults will say to me, well, I was a child, therefore I know how to feed. Or better yet, I have a child, and so I can feed. But then they come across introduction of solids, where children will eat foods, yes, but then they transition to toddlerhood, and all of a sudden those foods that the child was given and previously liked, they're not eating anymore. They're refusing foods. So then, we want to take a step back to some characteristics about child feeding. And that is, we're born, all of us, with that preference for sweet and salty, and we don't like bitter and sour. And we see this across the world. This is innate in all children. But let's get back to picky eating, children not wanting to eat, and why it drives us nuts. Well, as adults, children should be listening to us, right? Yeah, of course. But maybe it's a bit more than that, more in the sense that we know that if children will eat well and eat healthfully, they'll grow, they'll learn, it will prevent diseases. We want them to do that. So then when that child doesn't do it, it's driving us crazy. So what do we resort to doing? We're going to strap them to the table, we're going to sit them down, and we're going to make them eat the foods that we want them to eat. And we see this across the world. I've been to Asia, Africa, South America, and yes, here in the US, we all do it. We want to get children to eat. Now, first, before we talk about this, we need to understand a little bit about development and child development, and there's both physiological and psychological factors that influence how children will be eating. So we do know that children are born with a greater number of papillae on their tongue, which means they have more taste buds. More taste buds means they taste things more acutely. And the same for olfactory senses. So when you put that big plate of broccoli in front of their face, they're really going to smell it. And I know all of you have experienced that as well. Now, not only that, but you have the muscle in their mouth and their coordination and how they're able to form a bolus so they can swallow food so they don't choke. That all takes skill and takes time to develop. And that's not even counting that they are losing teeth and teeth are coming in and they're trying to work that, as well as they're managing with their hands and how to eat and use utensils. But then we also have the psychological. And that psychological piece is that children are learning about food. They're trying to understand food, and this is in the child development terms, assimilation and accommodation, which means they're trying to take in information that they're receiving and fit it into their existing schema. So they're trying to say, okay, where does this food fit in what I know about food? And remember, they're young. They don't have a lot of background about food yet. So you take something as simple as a seed. You can't eat a seed from an apricot, but you can eat kiwi seeds or strawberry seeds. Well, how do we navigate through that? And that's part of what children are learning when we talk about food. And then the other piece that is innate is this food neophobia concept. Now, food neophobia is a fear of new foods. And it is real. And in fact, we've seen it that it's part of past history and seeing that it might have protected children from eating food that potentially could be harmful to them. So there is a hesitancy to try certain foods at a certain point. But the irony of this, in my travels internationally, is it's not just children. In fact, adults have just as much food neophobia as children do. And it's very interesting to watch adults who travel and are presented with food from another country, and they don't feel comfortable eating it either. It is real. So here's what we go to when we're thinking about these concepts. It's picky eating that really drives us nuts. But here's something to think about. Picky eating. Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Something I theorize. Why? Do we create our own picky eater because we take what is their natural process in learning about food and we turn it into the phenomena of picky eating? So we'll give an example of that. I know many adults, likely in here and across the world, who can imagine going through a day without having their cup of coffee, or 2 or 3, morning, lunch, afternoon. But I don't have a lot of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds coming to me saying, oh, I really need to have my coffee this morning. It's bitter. They don't like it. But 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we now see adults wanting coffee. It's something that is learned. So what that means is that we learn to eat and to like foods. However, important point here, that it's different depending on the child. So here's an image of a child. In fact, this is my youngest son. And this is his first exposure to a food. And it clearly is demonstrated that he does not like this food. He's not happy with this food. Mom, what did you do? But this food was cotton candy. Now, I'll tell you what, the texture initially created this very aversive response to him. He did not like it. It was a new texture and strange. He clearly was not happy. But about 30 seconds, when that cotton candy melted in his mouth, and all of a sudden, he got this nice palatable response, sweetness. Oh yeah, after about a minute, that bag of cotton candy was gone. So their time frame to like this food, because it was a sweet food, was much shorter. Now for bitter foods, this can be much more complex. It can take some more time. So I'm gonna present 4 tips how to handle a picky eater. So first, we're going to talk about repeated exposure. And what is repeated exposure? Quite simply, it means offering food multiple times, over and over and over. And in my research, I've had people come up to me and they say, gosh, I've heard that recommendation that children need to have 10 exposures before they'll like a food. Well, if you actually go back to that research study, no, it's not 10 magic number exposures. In fact, it could be 4 or 5, or it could be thousands. So it's really more or less repeatedly offering food over and over and over. Now, the second tip I want to give you is that adults help children learn about food. They're there to help facilitate understanding of food, and that is through explaining what food is and letting them explore it. And often we say, well, it's good, you like it. But adults don't tell children about food. What does it taste like? What does it feel like in their mouth? Where did it come from? How do you prepare it? How do you eat it? Children need this information. And then they also need opportunities to explore it, hands-on. They need to touch it. They need to smell it. They need to kind of play with it a little bit. This is how we help children learn about the foods that we offer to them. Now, the third tip is modeling, and I cannot say enough about the value of modeling and how often I have an adult come to me and they'll say, I cannot get my child to eat this food. And I'll say, well, do you eat it? No. I don't like it. Okay. There you go. So it is very likely that your child is watching what you're doing and will not eat that food for the rest of their life as well. This is one of my favorite pictures because it's from Uganda, and we can see that universal element of children's just engrossment in watching adults eat, the fascination with how we eat, and we have that role to help them by showing them how we eat food. Now, the last one I want to present, and this one I think is really fun because you hear it a lot. And I'm sure some of you may have used it. There's the no thank you bite, the one bite rule. You have to try it. Well, I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I wouldn't recommend it. And here's why. Because when you force a child to try a food, the food becomes the enemy, and it is this ominous broccoli that's chasing the child around to get them to eat it, and it won't get them to eat it. Or maybe they'll eat it in the short term, which means they might have that little pea, which honestly, as a dietitian, that has very little nutritional value to benefit them. But if we present the food in a positive way and we're not forcing them, they can develop a preference to like it. And in fact, we did a study here at the University of Idaho in which we asked college students about their current vegetable intake, the frequency of their intake, as well as their liking of vegetables. And we also had to ask, were they forced to eat them as a child? What we found out is that those college students who reported being forced to eat vegetables as a child ate fewer variety of vegetables and less frequent consumption of vegetables. So in the long run, it didn't work. So let's help them. Now, with these tips, I often have people say, will they eat? And yes, they do. They learn to eat. And here's what happens when feeding any child. With respect and understanding of their child development and the process of learning about food and not forcing them, but welcoming them to the world of food, you establish a positive relationship. And like my oldest son here is an infant, they will enjoy all foods like the barbecue lentils that you see here.